Zuri stood before the large observation window, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of space. The station hummed softly around her, a quiet reminder that she was far from home. Earth, a speck in the distance, was no longer the center of her universe. In this galaxy full of strange and powerful beings, humanity had once been seen as weak, primitive. But things had changed. The humans had fought back hard and earned their place, however fragile it may seem. The stars glittered against the black void, but Zuri wasn't focused on their beauty. She was lost in thought, wondering if this vast emptiness would ever truly feel like home. The weight of the universe pressed down on her, but her mind kept circling back to her past, her roots. As a young black woman in a galaxy full of alien races, Zuri often felt caught between two worlds. The legacy of her ancestors, the struggles, the victories, was still alive in her, but here, on this station, it felt like an echo. Too distant, too quiet. She had been sent here to represent humanity, to ensure that the peace between species held, but at what cost? The complexities of diplomacy were exhausting, and the political maneuvering of alien leaders felt more like a game than anything that could bring real change. Zuri had learned to play the game, to smile and nod when necessary, but inside she was always questioning. Was this really the best her people could do? Was there more to their future than just surviving? The faint buzz of her communicator snapped her out of her thoughts. She glanced down at the message that had just arrived. "Meet me in the main hall. Urgent." The message was from Kara, a young alien woman who had become one of Zuri's few allies on the station. Kara had the type of quiet strength Zuri admired. Despite her own struggles as an outsider in this space station, filled with unfamiliar faces, Kara always seemed calm, grounded. But today, there was something different about the message. Something urgent. Zuri stood up, smoothing down her dark jumpsuit. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the window as she took one last look at Earth, her mind racing. What could Kara need now? The station's corridors were quiet as Zuri walked briskly toward the meeting point. It was always like this in the early hours. Most of the alien delegates and crew members were asleep or occupied with other tasks. The silence was both calming and oppressive. The hum of the station's engines filled the background, a constant reminder that they were hurtling through the stars, far from the planet they had once called home. When Zuri reached the main hall, Kara was waiting for her. The pale-skinned alien woman stood by the entrance, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders. There was a look of urgency in her eyes that Zuri had never seen before. Kara's expression softened when she saw Zuri approach. "Zuri," Kara greeted, her voice low, almost reluctant. "I didn't want to bring this to you, but it's important." "What's going on?" Zuri asked, her pulse quickening. Kara's demeanor was too serious. Something was wrong. Kara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I heard something. A human woman. She was tortured. Brutally. Because she called someone her mate." Kara's eyes met Zuri's, and in that instant Zuri felt a chill run down her spine. "They made everyone watch." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. She'd heard rumors of humans being targeted by certain factions, alien groups who still saw them as lesser beings, but she hadn't thought it would go this far. "Tortured?" Zuri repeated, her voice tight. "For calling someone her mate." Kara nodded grimly. It was an act of defiance to them. A human daring to express affection for an alien in such a way. It's seen as an insult, a violation. They punished her for it, and they made sure everyone knew what happens when humans forget their place. The words hit Zuri like a physical blow. A human, one of her people, tortured just for showing love. For daring to call someone a mate. The injustice of it burned through her, fueling a fire that she hadn't realized was smoldering inside. "They're sending a message," Kara said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "And it's not just to humans. It's to everyone who dares to think they can break the boundaries of species." Zuri clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. This wasn't just about one woman. This was about the future of humanity, the future of her people, and the time for silence was over. "We can't let this go unpunished," Zuri said, her voice firm. She turned toward Kara, her resolve hardening. "We need to do something. We can't let them think they can get away with this." Kara met her gaze, and for a brief moment, Zuri saw something flicker in her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. Then Kara nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in. "I knew you'd say that." Zuri exhaled slowly, her gaze lifting to the vast expanse of space once again. The universe felt different now, colder somehow. But she couldn't back down. Not now. Not when her people needed her more than ever. Zuri had barely left the hall when Kara caught up with her, her steps quick but measured. "You need to see this. We're not alone in this fight," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. Zuri looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Kara glanced around the corridor, ensuring they weren't being overheard, before pulling Zuri aside into a quieter passageway. The station was always bustling with activity, but there were areas like this one, hidden corners where one could speak freely without fear of being watched. "I've been talking to someone," Kara continued, lowering her voice even further. "An ally. One of the exiles. She's seen the same things we have, but from a different perspective. She knows what they're doing, and she's willing to help." Zuri raised an eyebrow. "An exile? Help us? I'm listening, but this sounds too good to be true." Kara hesitated. "It's not that simple. She's different. But she's been tracking the movements of the faction that did this. She can get us the intel we need." Zuri felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She trusted Kara, but this situation was growing more complex by the minute. Still, the idea of an ally who understood the enemy from the inside intrigued her. "Who is she?" "Her name is Kara," Kara said with a small smirk. "Just like mine, but she's older and far more experienced. She's been fighting against these factions for years in the shadows." Zuri considered it for a moment, weighing the risks. She was used to dealing with complicated situations. Negotiating peace between species was never as simple as it seemed. But this felt different. This wasn't just about diplomacy, this was personal. "All right, let's meet her." Kara nodded, her expression serious now. "Follow me." They walked through a series of dimly lit corridors, each turn taking them deeper into the bowels of the station. The air grew cooler as they descended. Zuri could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was certain of one thing. This meeting would change everything. After a few minutes, they reached a heavy door at the end of a narrow hallway. Kara stopped and turned to Zuri, her gaze unwavering. "This is it," Kara said, her voice barely a whisper. Zuri nodded, her heart beating faster now. She wasn't just walking into another diplomatic meeting. This was different. This was a confrontation with the people who had caused so much pain. The people who had tormented someone simply for calling another being her mate. Kara pressed a button on the wall, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. Beyond it stood a small, sparsely furnished room. A single chair sat in the center, and in the dim light, Zuri could make out the figure of a woman standing near the wall, her back turned. She was tall, with silver-blue skin that shimmered faintly under the light. Her hair, a mass of tightly coiled braids, fell down her back. Despite her alien appearance, there was something familiar about her, the way she carried herself, the unspoken strength that radiated from her. She turned slowly as they entered, her piercing violet eyes locking onto Zuri's. "I've heard a lot about you," the woman said, her voice smooth and deep, yet full of an unsettling calm. "Zuri, isn't it?" Zuri nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're the one Kara has been talking about?" The woman gave a small, knowing smile. "I am. I've been following the actions of the factions you're up against for a long time. And I know what you're going through. What you're about to face." Kara stepped forward, standing beside Zuri. "This is it. We need the information you have, anything that can help us fight back." The woman didn't answer right away. She seemed to be weighing Zuri's presence, as if assessing the younger woman's resolve. Finally, she spoke. "You don't know the half of it. What you're up against isn't just a group of powerful beings. It's a network, a web of influence that stretches across the galaxy." Zuri took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I don't care how far it stretches. We're going to end this. We have to. The woman's lips twitched at the corners, a small sign of approval, but there was no joy in it. That's the spirit, but you'll need more than courage to win this fight. You'll need to understand their methods, how they think, how they break their enemies. Zuri clenched her fists at her sides. I'll do whatever it takes. The woman studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Then let's get to work. The air in the small room was thick with tension. Zuri stood still, trying to absorb everything the alien woman had said, but her mind was racing. How had things gotten so complicated? A part of her wanted to escape the weight of it all, to find a quiet corner of the universe and pretend this wasn't happening, but another part, the part that had been shaped by a lifetime of struggle, refused to back down. The woman, Kara's ally, studied Zuri closely, her violet eyes sharp as she took in the younger woman's expression. Zuri's fist tightened at her side. I can't do this alone, Zuri muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Kara's voice broke the silence. You don't have to. Zuri met Kara's gaze. She had always admired her quiet strength, the way she could speak and act with purpose without showing weakness. But this fight was bigger than either of them. You know, the woman, who had yet to give her name, said softly, there's something you need to understand. This is about more than just this mission. It's about everything you've been through to get here. Zuri frowned, unsure what the woman meant. What do you mean by that? The alien woman leaned forward slightly. I can see it in your eyes. The weight of your past. You've carried that burden for so long, Zuri. But you can't just keep holding on to it. Not if you want to win. Zuri clenched her jaw, her gaze dropping for a moment. The mention of her past stung. She wasn't proud of the baggage she carried, but it had shaped her, made her who she was. The pain, the losses, the never-ending fight for justice, it was all tangled up inside her. There was no escaping it. I don't need a lecture about my past, Zuri said, her voice cold. Kara stepped forward. She's not lecturing you, Zuri. She's trying to help. Zuri shot her a sharp look, but Kara only nodded slightly. It was clear that Kara was trying to push her forward, to help her see what she had been avoiding. Still, Zuri wasn't ready to dive into her own personal history. Not yet. The woman spoke again, her tone calm but firm. You think this fight is about the aliens, about diplomacy, about torture. But it's not. It's about who you are, your identity, your strength. That's what will get you through. Zuri's eyes narrowed. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, the woman said softly. I know that you're carrying the weight of generations. The struggle of your people, your culture, all of that is in you. You can either carry it with pride, or you can let it crush you. Zuri's breath hitched. She could feel the weight of her ancestors pressing on her chest, but there was no way she would let this woman, this stranger, tell her what to do with it. My culture is my strength, Zuri finally said, her voice unwavering. But it's not all I have. I'm more than my past. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging something unspoken. That's exactly what I need to hear. Zuri looked away, her mind spinning with a mixture of anger and confusion. She had spent her entire life trying to escape the shadows of history, only to find that it was impossible. Her past was always there, lurking, reminding her of everything her people had suffered, everything they had overcome. The silence stretched between them. Tell me about the woman, Zuri said suddenly, breaking the quiet. The one who was tortured. The woman's expression softened, though there was still a flicker of pain in her eyes. Her name was Eni. She was a survivor, like you. But she didn't have your strength. She was just a woman trying to live in a galaxy that didn't want her. Zuri swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She could feel the weight of those words, the implications of what had been done to Eni, and she knew that it wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was a message, a test. The alien woman stood up, her figure tall and imposing, and turned to face Zuri directly. You have something they'll never take from you. Your heritage, your heart. That's the one thing they can't break. But you have to be willing to use it. Zuri nodded slowly, her eyes steely with resolve. "I will." But even as the words left her mouth, a part of her was unsure. Could she really tap into the strength of her ancestors and her culture? Could she overcome her own doubts and fears? Or would she fall victim to the same mistakes that had plagued her people for centuries? The question lingered in the air as the weight of the future settled heavily on Zuri's shoulders. Zuri sat in the dimly lit room, the hum of the station's systems a constant background noise. The air felt colder than usual, as if the weight of what she had just learned had sucked the warmth out of the space around her. She replayed Kara's words in her mind, trying to piece together the horror of the situation, but it all seemed too surreal. A human, tortured for calling another species her mate. The fact that it had happened to one of her own, someone who shared her blood, her culture, made it hit harder. Zuri had read about the injustices humanity had faced in history books, slavery, colonization, and more, but somehow this was different. This wasn't an old wound, this was her reality. This was... "What kind of monsters do this?" she whispered to herself, her voice rough, betraying the anger she barely contained. It wasn't just about the woman who had suffered. It wasn't just about the torture. It was about what this act meant for every human in the galaxy. It was a clear message. You do not belong here. Kara sat across from her, quietly watching. She had said nothing since Zuri's outburst, sensing the struggle within her friend. Kara had her own reasons for wanting to see the faction fall, reasons Zuri wasn't entirely familiar with, but she understood the need for justice, for retribution. "This isn't the first time," Kara said softly, breaking the silence. "There have been others too, not just humans either. But for us, it's always the most brutal. We're easy targets because they think we're weak." Zuri clenched her jaw. "We're not weak." "I know," Kara replied, her eyes flashing. "That's why they hate us. We're survivors." The silence returned, but this time it felt less oppressive, more purposeful. Zuri's mind began to work through the pieces, trying to put a plan together, trying to find the path forward. But the path was murky, filled with obstacles she couldn't see clearly yet. They needed more information. They needed to understand who these perpetrators were and how deep their power truly reached. "They made everyone watch," Zuri said suddenly, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "Everyone had to see it." Kara nodded, her face hardening. "It's a tactic. A warning." Zuri stood up, pacing the room in quick, tight steps. Her mind raced. If they could expose this, if they could bring the truth to light, but how? Who could they trust in a galaxy where betrayal was common, where loyalty was often just a means to an end? "I won't stand by and let them keep doing this," Zuri muttered to herself. "We need to make them feel what they've done. They can't get away with it." "You're not alone in this," Kara said, her voice soft but firm. "You have allies. You have us." Zuri stopped pacing and looked at Kara. She could see the determination in her eyes. Kara wasn't just a friend. She was a soldier, just like Zuri was now, even though she had never asked for that title. But their shared struggle against the powers that sought to keep them down had forged a bond between them that was unbreakable. Zuri's thoughts turned to the woman who had suffered, the one they had talked about earlier, Ini. She could almost hear the screams in the silence of her mind. What had she felt? What had she endured? And why had they made her suffer in front of everyone? It wasn't just about the torture, it was about humiliation. It was about breaking her spirit in front of her own people. It was about making an example of her so that no one else would dare to defy the so-called superior races. She turned back to Kara. "We need to find her, Ini. We need to know exactly what happened, and we need to make sure this never happens again." Kara stood up, moving to the small desk in the corner of the room and retrieving a data pad. "I've been trying to get access to the footage of the incident. I know someone on the station who might be able to help." Zuri's eyes narrowed. "Someone? The right person. They have access to everything here. If anyone knows what went down, it's them." Zuri took a deep breath, her mind still swirling. This wasn't just about getting revenge. It wasn't even about punishment, though both were certainly part of it. This was about standing up, about showing that no one, not even the most powerful alien factions, could crush their spirit. She nodded slowly. Let's find the truth. Kara's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the tension in the room lifted. They both knew that this was just the beginning. The truth was buried deep, but with every step they took, they would bring it to the surface. And when they did, they would make the entire galaxy see the cruelty of what had been done. And Zuri? Zuri would never stop until justice had been served. The dim glow of the datapad lit up Zuri's face as she scrolled through the long list of encrypted files. It had taken hours, but finally they had managed to gain access to the station's internal systems. Kara's contact, a former tech specialist with connections to the higher-ups, had come through. But the more Zuri uncovered, the deeper the pit in her stomach grew. It was more than just the torture of one human woman. It was systematic. It was methodical. "They're everywhere," Zuri muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning over the lists of encrypted surveillance files. The names of various factions flashed across the screen, powerful, influential. The thought of their reach, their control over not just humans but entire systems, weighed heavily on her. Kara was leaning against the wall beside her, arms crossed, watching the data scroll by. She didn't speak. She knew this was a moment for Zuri to process everything, but she couldn't keep quiet for long. "There's more we need to find out," Kara said quietly. "This isn't just about one woman. This is a larger game." Zuri's fingers froze for a moment. "I know, it's been planned for a long time. They think they're untouchable." "They think wrong," Kara said, her voice low but firm. Zuri's jaw tightened as she let the weight of the words sink in. She'd known it would be bad. She'd suspected it. But seeing the data, the names, the connections, it made the truth so much darker. There was a network, a web of power that stretched across galaxies, pulling strings, controlling the lives of millions, and it was all centered around the notion of dominance. Humans were a threat to that dominance, and Zuri knew they'd stop at nothing to crush any resistance. "Who's behind this?" Zuri whispered, though she already had a sinking feeling about the answer. "The Vorex. They're an alliance of the wealthiest, most powerful factions in the galaxy. They've been manipulating events for years, controlling everything from the trade routes to the most advanced weapons." Kara's voice grew colder as she spoke. "They believe the universe is theirs to rule. The humans, the Zarian, the Geth, everyone else is just collateral." Zuri's mind raced. She thought of Earth, of her family, of all the lives she'd sworn to protect, and the rage that had been simmering within her finally broke through the surface. "I'll make them pay," she muttered. Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk, nails biting into the cold metal. "We can't just expose them, we have to destroy them." Kara stepped forward, her tone more urgent. "No, Zuri. We need to be careful. This is bigger than we realize. The Vorex has agents everywhere, on every planet, in every station, even inside the councils of power." Zuri's chest tightened. "Then how do we even begin to fight something like that? How do we stop an enemy who has no limits?" "You start small," Kara said, her voice steady. "We need to expose their weak points. There are cracks in their network. We just need to find them and exploit them. The truth is powerful, it's all about timing." Zuri let out a breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had always been the one who pushed forward, always the one who believed in fighting until the very end. But this wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for their place in the galaxy, a battle for dignity, for the very soul of her people. She looked at Kara, a fire igniting in her chest. "Then let's find those cracks. Let's tear this system down." Kara nodded, but her eyes were thoughtful, as if weighing the consequences of their actions. "We'll need help, allies, not just from humans. If we can gather enough support, we might stand a chance." Zuri considered that. She had already seen how the galaxy could be unforgiving, how alliances could turn into betrayals in an instant. But maybe that was the key. The strength of humanity had always been its ability to form bonds, to stand together against the odds. Perhaps that was where their true power lay, not just in the fight itself, but in uniting others. "We start with the truth," Zuri said finally. "We gather every bit of information we can. We expose them for what they are. And then we bring the fight to them," Kara added. Her voice was sharp with resolve. Zuri took a deep breath, her mind already shifting into battle mode. She had no illusions about the road ahead. It would be dangerous, it would be brutal, but she had no choice. If she didn't fight now, the Vorex would continue to destroy everything she cared about. "Let's do it," Zuri said. "Let's make them feel what they've done." The fire in her chest burned brighter now, and as she and Kara looked at each other, they knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would tremble before their truth. The room was cold, too cold. Zuri stood by the small window watching the stars. Their distant light reminded her of Earth, of the long nights spent under the same sky, a sky that now felt far beyond her reach. The station, a web of metal and glass, was silent, except for the hum of its systems. It was as if even the station could sense the gravity of what was about to unfold. Zuri turned away from the window, walking over to the desk cluttered with datapads, maps, and schematics of various factions. The Vorex was at the top of every list, their symbols haunting the edges of every report. She felt the weight of their presence, looming, suffocating. This wasn't just another diplomatic mission. This was war. Her mind was a blur of thoughts, fragmented pieces that refused to come together. Kara's words echoed in her head. Start small, find the cracks, expose them. But how? She had spent so long trying to maintain peace, trying to negotiate a future for humanity, in a galaxy full of alien factions. The thought of fighting felt foreign to her. She had always been the voice, the mediator, not the warrior. But now she had no choice. This fight was no longer just about strategy or diplomacy. It was about survival, her people's survival. And in that, Zuri felt something stir deep inside her, a fire that had been there all along waiting to be ignited. But there was also fear. She couldn't deny it. The stakes were higher than ever before. This wasn't just a battle of power, but a battle of principles. Zuri had always believed in negotiation, in finding common ground, in building bridges. But now she had to tear down walls. She had to confront the enemy head-on, and that scared her more than anything. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Zuri's voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking the question aloud would make the answer too real. Kara, who had been silent until now, looked up from the map she had been studying. "No, I don't wonder. I know we're doing the right thing." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "The Vorex have made it clear, there's no turning back now." Zuri let out a breath, pacing slowly across the room. "I've spent my life negotiating, Kara, finding solutions where everyone walks away with something. But this is different. I've never faced an enemy that didn't want peace. I've never had to fight for something so raw." Kara stood up, walking over to Zuri. She was quiet for a moment, letting Zuri collect her thoughts before speaking again. "Sometimes you have to fight for peace, Zuri. You can't always talk your way out of everything. Some battles don't end with a handshake. Sometimes they end in blood." Zuri looked at her, her eyes dark with the weight of what was to come. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be a warrior." "You didn't sign up to be a victim either," Kara replied, her gaze unflinching. "This is bigger than you or me. This is about the future of our people, the survival of everything we fought for. The Vorex won't stop until they've crushed us all. And if you want to stop them, you're going to have to fight. The time for talking is over." Zuri turned away, facing the window again. Her heart was heavy, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. She had always believed in the power of words. Words were weapons too, she had thought. They could change minds, shape futures. But now she wondered if that was enough. Her fingers grazed the cold metal of the desk, and she felt the pull of her ancestors, the strength that had been passed down through generations of survival, of resistance. She could feel the legacy of her people coursing through her veins. And for the first time, Zuri realized that this fight wasn't just about survival. It was about identity. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about standing tall in the face of oppression. Zuri took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Then let's fight," she said, her voice firm, the uncertainty that had lingered now replaced with determination. "Let's tear down the Vorex. Piece by piece, We expose them. We make them feel what they've done. Kara smiled, a small but approving nod. That's the Zuri I know. Zuri turned to face her, a fire igniting within her chest. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her people, for her culture, for everything that made her human. The fight had begun. Zuri sat in the darkened corner of the room, her fingers absently tracing the edges of a datapad, but her mind was elsewhere. The walls of the station felt like they were closing in, the silence oppressive, thick with the weight of what they had just committed to. Her heart raced and every muscle in her body was tense, ready for the battle that was sure to come. But as the hours passed, the unease grew. The mission was clear: expose the Vorex, tear down their foundation. They had their first lead, a minor faction within the Vorex's network that was vulnerable. But as Kara had warned, getting too close to them would be dangerous. The Vorex had spies everywhere. Zuri had never been this far out on a limb before, and part of her was still unsure if they could win. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chiming of the station's doorbell. Zuri froze. It was late, far too late for a scheduled visit. Her instincts kicked in, and she quickly slid the datapad under a pile of papers. She had no idea who would be showing up now, but she couldn't afford any surprises. With one hand still on the desk, she reached for the concealed sidearm tucked into her belt. "Who is it?" Zuri called, her voice steady but cautious. The voice that responded wasn't one she expected. "It's Jovan, let me in." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. Jovan was one of the few allies they had within the alien community. He was from the Ivaran species, a race known for their intelligence and ruthlessness, but Jovan was different. He had helped Zuri navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries, offering her valuable information about the inner workings of the Vorex. She hesitated for a moment before responding. "Come in." The door slid open, and Jovan stepped into the room. His dark green skin shimmered in the low light, his black eyes scanning the space as he entered. Despite his towering frame and intimidating presence, his expression was calm, almost unreadable. "What are you doing here, Jovan?" Zuri asked, trying to mask her surprise. Jovan didn't immediately answer. Instead, he moved to the center of the room and looked around with a slow, methodical gaze. "I'm here because we need to talk, and because you're in over your head." Zuri's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected him to be blunt, but she also hadn't expected him to show up unannounced. "But we've got everything under control," Zuri replied, her voice tight with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "You don't," Jovan said, his voice low but intense. "You think you can just expose the Vorex. You think you can just tear them down from the inside without consequences." He took a step closer to her, his eyes piercing. "The Vorex have their claws in too many places. There are more of them than you realize, and they have the resources to eliminate anyone who stands in their way." Zuri didn't flinch. She had heard this before, and while Jovan's words carried weight, she wasn't ready to back down. "Then we fight back. We expose them for what they are piece by piece. We build the resistance." Jovan raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Resistance?" he echoed, almost like the word itself was foreign to him. "You think a few rebels can take on an empire like the Vorex? You don't even have enough support to get this started, Zuri. You're playing with fire, and fire burns everyone it touches." Zuri's jaw clenched. "I'm not afraid to fight for what's right." "I know you're not," Jovan replied, his voice softening. "But this isn't just about what's right. This is about survival. And right now you're fighting a war you're not prepared for. You'll need more than what you have." There was a long pause before Zuri spoke again. "Then help us." Jovan looked at her, his eyes calculating. "You're asking me for help? You know that means putting my own neck on the line." "You know what that could cost me." Zuri met his gaze, her voice steady. "We all have something to lose, but we all have something to gain, too. If we take them down, it's not just for us. It's for everyone they've crushed, for all the people they've oppressed." Jovan seemed to consider her words carefully. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help. But you need to understand this won't be easy. The Vorex don't play by the same rules you do." Zuri felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but she knew this was just the beginning. "We'll do whatever it takes." Jovan's lips curved into a small smile. "I'm in, but be ready. The moment we start, there's no turning back." Zuri nodded, the resolve in her heart strengthening. The fight had just become bigger, but now she had the help of someone who truly understood the stakes. The first step was taken. Now they would see if it was enough to bring down the Vorex. Zuri stood at the edge of the small observation deck, her fingers tightly gripping the railing as she stared out into the vast, unfeeling expanse of space. The station's artificial lights cast a cold glow on the metal walls around her, a sharp contrast to the swirling darkness outside. She could feel her pulse quicken as the weight of the task ahead pressed down on her. The first phase of their plan was set into motion. Behind her, Kara and Jovan were finalizing the last details of their approach. The intel they had gathered on the Vorex was solid, but it was only the beginning. Their target was a key asset, a trading post under Vorex control, but Zuri knew it wouldn't be easy. The Vorex didn't allow their operations to be disrupted without consequences. "I don't like this," Kara said from behind her, her voice low but filled with concern. "We don't know enough about what's at stake here. We're walking into their territory with a target on our backs." Zuri's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn around. She had heard the concerns, and she shared them. But there was no turning back now. "We have to start somewhere. We can't just wait for them to come to us." "We can't afford to make a mistake," Jovan added, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. "The Vorex will retaliate. And if they do, it won't just be you and me they'll come after. They'll go after everyone we care about." Zuri turned around slowly, her expression hard. "If we do nothing, they win. Every day we wait, they tighten their grip on the galaxy. We can't just stand by anymore." Kara met her gaze and nodded slowly, though the unease never left her eyes. "I know. I'm just saying we need to be prepared for the worst." Jovan, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward and handed Zuri a small data pad. "Here's the plan. We'll infiltrate the trade post tonight, gather whatever intel we can on their operations, and get out before they even know we were there. We hit them hard, fast, and we're gone before they have a chance to react." Zuri glanced at the screen, her eyes scanning over the mission details. The trade post was heavily fortified, surrounded by layers of security, both human and alien. They had a brief window to strike, and it would require precision, timing, and a level of secrecy that bordered on impossible. "I know the risks," Zuri said, her voice steady, betraying no hint of doubt. "But this is what we've been working for. We can't waste any more time." Kara stepped up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Just don't do anything reckless. We need you to stay sharp." Zuri gave a small nod, but there was something steely in her eyes now. "We're all in this together. No one gets left behind." With that, they began their preparations in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The plan was simple, but it was dangerous. There was no room for error. As they suited up, Zuri's mind drifted back to Earth, to her family, her people. Every decision she made now was for them. It wasn't just about exposing the Vorex or tearing down their network. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity wasn't something to be ignored, something to be crushed underfoot. They were strong, they were resilient, and they weren't backing down. When they were ready, Zuri looked up at Kara and Jovan. "Let's move out." The journey to the trade post was silent, save for the low hum of their shuttle's engines. As they neared the facility, Zuri's heart began to pound, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. She had fought many battles, but this one felt different. There was no turning back. The Vorex had made their move, and now it was their turn to strike. The facility loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and glass, its exterior bathed in harsh lights. They could see the movement of guards patrolling the perimeter, unaware of the threat heading their way. Zuri's hands tightened around the controls, her breath steady, focused. "We stick to the plan," she said, her voice a whisper through the comms. "Get in, get the intel, and get out." Jovan and Kara both acknowledged the command, and the shuttle shifted into its final approach. As they landed in a concealed space just outside the compound, Zuri's pulse raced, but her mind was clear. They were about to make their move. No matter what happened, they would show the Vorex that humanity was not to be underestimated. The darkness of the night wrapped itself around them like a heavy cloak. Zuri's breath was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest as the shuttle touched down with barely a whisper against the cold ground. The trade post loomed ahead, its towering structures glowing with artificial light, casting sharp shadows over the perimeter. Guards walked the beat, their movements precise, almost mechanical. They had no idea that they were about to be blindsided. Zuri's fingers moved to the holster at her side, checking her equipment for the third time. Everything was in place, just like they had planned. No mistakes. Not tonight. "We move fast. No detours," Zuri whispered into the comms, her voice low but firm. "We can't afford any slip-ups." Kara and Jovan nodded, their faces hidden behind the darkened visors of their helmets. They all knew the risks, the danger of being caught. The Vorex had eyes everywhere, and if they were discovered, the consequences would be swift and lethal. But the need to expose them, to gather the intel that could cripple their operation, drove them forward. They moved as one, slipping from the shuttle's shadow and into the cover of a nearby alley. Zuri led the way, her senses sharp, every step calculated. Her mind was focused, but beneath the steel of her resolve, there was a flicker of doubt. Was this really the right path? Could they trust this fragile alliance they were building? She shoved the thoughts aside. The mission came first. They reached the perimeter of the trade post, where the high-tech security system was at full alert. Zuri crouched low, eyeing the nearest guard. They had trained for this. A silent takedown. One wrong move and the entire mission would collapse. With a quick motion, Jovan moved first, his form a blur in the dark. He was quick and efficient, neutralizing the guard with practiced precision. Zuri's heart skipped a beat as she watched him slip into the shadows, disappearing like a ghost. Kara followed, moving with the same quiet grace, her movements barely disturbing the air around her. Zuri's turn came next. She followed the plan, swift, silent. She moved behind the guard, ensuring that the takedown was clean and quick. The man barely made a sound as he dropped to the ground. Zuri exhaled, her heartbeat still pounding in her ears. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The entrance to the facility was guarded, but there was an access panel nearby, hidden from the patrolling guards. Kara quickly set to work, her fingers dancing across the control panel, inputting a series of codes they had intercepted earlier. 2 minutes, Kara whispered. "We're in." Zuri crouched low, scanning their surroundings. The guards were still unaware, their attention focused elsewhere. The seconds felt like hours as they waited. Then, with a soft beep, the door clicked open. "Let's go," Zuri commanded, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. They moved quickly through the entrance, entering the inner hall of the trade post. The facility was a labyrinth of dark corridors and cold metallic walls. They had to move fast. The intel they needed was somewhere deep within the heart of the compound, in a secured server room. It was only a matter of time before the Vorex noticed something was off, so they had no time to waste. As they approached their destination, Zuri's thoughts raced. Every part of her screamed that they were too exposed, too vulnerable. But this was the only chance they had to get the data they needed. There was no going back. They reached the server room door. Kara was already on it, hacking into the system. Zuri stood guard, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. Her breath slowed as she focused, her hand hovering near her sidearm, ready for any sudden confrontation. "Got it," Kara said, her voice tight with anticipation. "Access granted." The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing rows of high-security servers. Zuri and Jovan quickly moved inside, setting up their portable data extractors. The minutes dragged on as the machines hummed to life, downloading the encrypted files from the servers. Zuri watched the progress bar fill, her mind racing through what they'd uncovered so far. Just as the final data file downloaded, the soft hum of alarms started to wail in the distance. "We've been compromised," Jovan said, his voice clipped. "We need to move now." Zuri's heart raced as the weight of their actions hit her. They had what they needed, but now it was time to get out. They couldn't afford to linger any longer. Move, 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 Zuri barked. They rushed back down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The alarms blared louder, and Zuri could feel the heat of the Vorex's pursuit on their heels. They weren't out yet. But they would be, they had to be. As they reached the exit, the sound of shouts grew louder. Their window of escape was closing fast. Zuri led them into the shadows, her eyes never leaving the growing chaos behind them. The Vorex had made their move, and so had they. The sirens blared, cutting through the silence like a blade. The sound echoed off the cold metallic walls of the facility, signaling the beginning of their worst nightmare. Zuri's heart hammered in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder, the distant sounds of Vorex soldiers closing in like a storm. "Keep moving!" Zuri barked, her voice sharp as she led the way back toward the exit. The data was secure, but it didn't matter if they didn't make it out alive. Kara and Jovan were close behind her, their faces grim, their movements swift and efficient. They had trained for this, they had prepared for the worst, but there was no way to prepare for the relentless pursuit of the Vorex. Zuri knew that they were only moments away from being caught. The station's layout was a maze, and every corner could hide an enemy. "Left!" Kara shouted, spotting a side corridor that could offer temporary cover. Zuri didn't hesitate, darting into the narrow hallway without a second thought. They ran, their footsteps pounding in unison, a rhythm that kept them grounded in the chaos. Zuri's breath came in short gasps, her mind calculating their next move with razor-sharp precision. They needed to get to the shuttle. They needed to escape, and they needed to do it fast. As they turned another corner, a burst of gunfire erupted behind them. Zuri ducked instinctively, her heart leaping into her throat. The Vorex were right behind them. They weren't going to make it much farther without a fight. "We can't outrun them forever," Jovan's voice rang out, tight with urgency. Zuri glanced at him, her face set in determination. "We won't have to. Just keep running." They pushed forward, rounding the next corner only to find themselves at a dead end. The hallway stretched into a reinforced door that looked impenetrable. "Back!" Zuri snapped. "We need to find another way out." But as they turned to retreat, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. The Vorex were on their tail, and they were closing in. "We don't have time!" Kara yelled, pulling at Zuri's sleeve. "There's no way we're getting through this door. We need to fight." Zuri felt the weight of the decision settling over her. She knew Kara was right. They couldn't run forever. But fighting back wasn't just dangerous. It was a risk they couldn't afford. They had to be quick. They had to be smarter. Zuri's eyes darted around the corridor, scanning for anything that could give them an advantage. There, a vent shaft in the ceiling. It was small, but it was their only option. "Up!" Zuri commanded. She grabbed Kara's arm and pushed her toward the vent. "Now!" Kara didn't hesitate. She leapt up, reaching for the grate, and pulled herself through in one smooth motion. Jovan was right behind her, then Zuri, her body slipping into the tight space just as a round of gunfire slammed into the wall behind her. The air was thick and musty as they crawled through the narrow shaft, the sound of their breathing the only noise in the otherwise oppressive silence. Zuri's mind raced as they moved. She had always been one to think ahead, but the feeling of being trapped, of not knowing if they would make it out, was something she had never prepared for. "There's a maintenance hatch up ahead," Jovan said, his voice muffled through the walls. "We'll be able to get out from there." Zuri nodded, relief flooding her veins as they approached the hatch. They were close, so close. She could hear the soldiers shouting, searching for them below, but for now they were safe. For now. "Move fast," Zuri urged. "We don't have much time before they realize we're above them." Kara nodded, and the three of them continued crawling toward the hatch. When they reached it, Jovan quickly worked the release and the heavy cover slid open with a low hiss. Zuri felt her breath catch in her throat as the cold night air hit her face. The hatch opened into a small alleyway behind the facility. They were out. For now. Zuri's heart still raced as she helped Kara and Jovan down from the ledge. But they had done it. They had escaped. The sound of sirens still echoed in the distance, but their lives were no longer at risk, not for the moment. They had what they came for. "We're not out of the woods yet," Zuri said, her voice steady but full of resolve. "But we have what we need." Jovan gave her a nod. This is only the beginning. Kara adjusted her gear, wiping the sweat from her brow. We'll hit them harder next time. Zuri looked at them both, her thoughts turning to the data they had secured. It was a victory, yes. But it was a small one. The Vorex were powerful. They were everywhere. And the fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. Let's move, Zuri said. We've got a war to win. The dim lights of the hideout flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. Zuri sat at the table, eyes scanning the data they had secured from the trade post. It was everything they needed to expose the Vorex's extensive network, their illegal dealings, their ties to corrupt government officials, evidence that could topple empires. But the weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her chest. She had expected this moment, the feeling of accomplishment, of victory, but it felt hollow. The data was in their hands, yet the war was just beginning. The Vorex were ruthless, and they would retaliate. We did it, Kara said, breaking the silence as she leaned against the wall, arms crossed. There was a faint smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. They both knew what came next. Zuri glanced up at her, her expression tight. For now. But what if this is just the beginning? The Vorex have resources we can't even imagine. What if they find out we have this? Kara sighed, pushing off the wall. They will, it's just a matter of when, but we've got the advantage. We're not alone anymore, Zuri. We've got allies, and those who've been oppressed by the Vorex. They'll rise with us. Zuri let out a breath, her hands tapping the table in frustration. But at what cost? Every time we strike, it costs us something. We lose more people. Every day we're playing with lives. Kara walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. This war, it's not just about us. It's about everything we're fighting for. We fight for the future, for the people who are suffering. If we stop now, it'll all have been for nothing. Zuri's eyes softened for a moment. She knew Kara was right, but the losses weighed heavily on her. Each face, each name that she couldn't save, it haunted her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her people, for her ancestors, for humanity's place in a galaxy that had long overlooked them. We can't stop, Zuri said quietly, more to herself than to Kara. We won't stop. Jovan, who had been silent until now, spoke up from the corner. You don't need to carry this burden alone, you never did. There are others willing to stand with you, humans and aliens alike. Together we can make a difference. Zuri nodded, but there was no smile on her lips. She had always been the leader, the one to rally people, to bring them together. But now it felt like she was being torn apart. There was a cost to everything they were doing, a price that only seemed to grow with each battle they fought. She glanced back at the datapad, the images of the Vorex's corrupt dealings staring back at her. This was her reality now. No more peace talks, no more diplomatic missions. She was in the middle of a war, one that couldn't be avoided. We need to take this to the council, Zuri said, finally breaking the silence. The evidence is solid, we can't just sit on it. Kara raised an eyebrow. The council? You think they'll back us? The Vorex have their hands in everything. They'll make sure we're labeled as the aggressors. We won't have a choice, Zuri replied, her voice low and firm. We'll present the facts, lay it all out. They can either stand with us or watch as the Vorex destroy everything we've worked for. If they want peace, they'll have to choose it. The Vorex aren't offering peace. They're offering subjugation. Jovan's voice broke through the tension. I'll get the word out. We'll need all the support we can muster. Zuri's gaze hardened. She knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger. But there was no turning back. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy had begun, and it would cost them everything. Make no mistake, Zuri said, looking both Kara and Jovan in the eyes. This isn't just about taking down the Vorex. It's about showing the entire galaxy what we're capable of. We're not just some backwater species to be used and discarded. We will be seen. Kara nodded, her expression resolute. We'll stand with you, Zuri, to the end. The weight of her words settled over Zuri. They had no choice now. This was bigger than any of them. It was a fight for their future, for the generations that would come after them. Zuri stood, straightening her back. Her gaze flickered to the door, where the unknown lay ahead. They weren't out of danger yet, but the first step had been taken, and no matter the cost, Zuri was ready to see it through. "We move out at dawn," Zuri said, her voice unwavering. "The Vorex won't know what hit them." The council chamber was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Zuri stood at the center, flanked by Kara and Jovan, their faces a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. The seats around them were filled with members of various factions, their eyes sharp and calculating, weighing the evidence Zuri had brought before them. She could feel their judgment like a physical pressure, but she refused to let it show. "This is it," Zuri muttered under her breath, glancing at Kara. "If they don't back us, everything we've done is for nothing." Kara didn't reply, but Zuri could see the tension in her posture. This was the moment of truth. Everything that had led up to this, the sabotage, the covert operations, the stolen data, it all came down to this one meeting. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy rested in the hands of these council members, and Zuri had to make them see what was at stake. The head of the council, a tall, imposing alien with dark, ridged skin, cleared his throat. "We are gathered today to discuss the findings of this council's emergency session, initiated by Zuri, representative of humanity. You have 1 hour to present your case. Speak plainly." Zuri stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Honorable members of the council, we have uncovered irrefutable evidence of Vorex corruption, their illegal dealings across multiple sectors, and their direct involvement in oppressing entire populations, including humans." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle in. "This data shows that they control trade routes, manipulate governments, and have caused untold suffering. We cannot ignore this any longer." She gestured toward the holographic display behind her, which flickered to life with images of Vorex officials shaking hands with corrupt leaders, secret weapons deals, and human slaves being trafficked through the galaxy. The room grew quiet as the evidence flashed before them. Zuri's eyes remained locked on the council members, reading their expressions. Some were indifferent, others appalled, but none were moved to action yet. "We have seen the brutality of the Vorex firsthand," Zuri continued, her voice hardening. "They think they can do whatever they want because they hold all the power. But humanity, our people, have fought too long, suffered too much to let this continue. If we do nothing, they will just tighten their grip, and they will crush anyone who dares to resist." A murmur rippled through the room, and Zuri could sense that her words were striking a chord, but the silence that followed felt like an impenetrable wall. She couldn't let this moment slip away. She had to push harder. "Make no mistake," Zuri said, her tone sharper, more forceful. "The Vorex won't stop until they've eradicated everything that stands in their way. They'll make us all submit, or they'll destroy us. But we have a choice. We can either stand with them and let this corruption fester, or we can fight back. We can expose the Vorex for what they are and end this cycle of violence once and for all. I'm asking you to stand with us. Stand with humanity." The room was still. No one spoke. Zuri's hands clenched at her sides as she waited, trying to keep the fear from showing on her face. This was a gamble. If the council decided to side with the Vorex, they would have no allies left. They would be fighting a war they couldn't win. Finally, the council head leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing as he spoke. "You ask for our support, but you offer us nothing but conflict and bloodshed. The Vorex are powerful. They control resources, armies, and influence that spans entire systems. And you think you can simply topple them with a handful of stolen data and a few rebels?" Zuri's jaw tightened, but she held his gaze. "We don't need to topple them overnight. We need a chance to fight back, to expose their lies. We need your backing, your resources, your influence. If you stand with us, we will rally the oppressed, humans, aliens, all those who have suffered at the hands of the Vorex, and we will show the galaxy that we won't be silenced." Another council member, an older, more reserved alien with silvery scales, spoke up. "What do you propose we do? What is the first step in this resistance?" Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "The first step is exposing the Vorex's crimes. We need to take this data and bring it to the people. We need to make the galaxy see the truth. Once they know what the Vorex are really doing, the tide will turn in our favor. We'll form alliances, gather support, and then we strike. The council chamber fell silent again, the tension hanging thick in the air. Zuri's gaze swept across the room, feeling the weight of their scrutiny. And then, slowly, one by one, several council members began to nod. "We will back you," the council head said finally, his voice low but resolute. "But know this, Zuri. Once we take this path, there will be no turning back. There will be no peace, no negotiation. Only war." Zuri's heart surged with a mixture of relief and resolve. This was it. The fight had begun. "Then let's make it count," Zuri said, her voice unwavering. The air was heavy with tension as the shuttle doors closed, sealing Zuri, Kara, and Jovan inside. The hum of the engines was a constant background to the storm of thoughts racing through Zuri's mind. They had the council's support, but that was only the beginning. Now came the hard part, turning words into action. "Are you sure about this?" Kara asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Zuri could hear the concern beneath the calm exterior. Kara was no stranger to conflict, but this felt different. The stakes were higher than ever. Zuri met her eyes, her expression resolute. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, the Vorex will just keep tightening their grip. We've exposed them. Now we take the next step." Jovan, seated beside them, was unusually quiet. He had always been the tactician, the one to strategize their next moves. But now even he seemed to be considering the magnitude of what they were about to do. "We need allies," Jovan said after a long pause, his voice low. "The Vorex have their hands in everything. If we're going to make a real impact, we'll need more than just stolen data and a few brave souls." Zuri nodded, her mind already processing their options. "We'll start by reaching out to the factions that have been oppressed by the Vorex, the Zarians, the Geth, even the smaller systems. They've suffered the most, and they'll be the first to join us. But it won't be enough," Kara added. "We need the larger powers, the ones with fleets, resources. Without them, this is just a rebellion with no chance of survival." Zuri's gaze hardened. "We'll find them. One step at a time." "We can't wait any longer." The shuttle cut through the stars, the dark void of space surrounding them like an endless ocean. Zuri could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her. This was no longer just about humanity's survival. It was about sending a message that the Vorex could no longer control them. "Prepare for landing," the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of the distant planet. Below them, the sprawling capital city of the Zarians came into view. Zuri had never been here before, but she knew the stakes. If they could convince the Zarians to join the fight, it would be a powerful symbol of unity. If they failed, well, they couldn't afford to fail. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the engines powering down as the door slid open. Zuri stood up, her legs feeling unsteady despite the years of training she had undergone. This was the moment. She stepped off the shuttle first, followed by Kara and Jovan. The Zarian capital was bustling with activity, but there was an underlying sense of unease in the air. Zuri had heard rumors of discontent brewing among the people, but it was clear that they were under the thumb of the Vorex. The streets were filled with soldiers, their uniforms unmistakable. They were everywhere, watching, waiting for someone to make a wrong move. Zuri walked with purpose, her eyes scanning the surroundings, feeling the weight of their mission. She could sense the tension in Kara and Jovan too. This wasn't just about making contact. It was about convincing a people that had lived under fear for so long that it was time to fight back. They reached a nondescript building in the heart of the city, a safe house used by resistance members. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with Zarian rebels. The air was thick with the scent of oil and smoke from the distant fires, a reminder of how much had been lost already. "We've come to offer an alliance," Zuri said, her voice steady. "We have the evidence. The Vorex are not the rulers they claim to be. They are oppressors, criminals, and we're here to stop them." The room was silent for a moment as the rebels exchanged glances. Zuri could see the doubt in their eyes, the weariness of a people who had fought for so long with little to show for it. But then a figure stepped forward. A tall Zarian woman, her face marked with scars of battle, met Zuri's gaze. "We've heard of you," the woman said, her voice low and cautious. "But we don't trust easily. The Vorex have shown us the cost of rebellion." "What makes you different?" Zuri met her stare, unwavering. "We're not asking you to fight for us. We're asking you to fight for yourselves. Together, we can bring the Vorex down." The room was still. Zuri held her breath, knowing that this moment would decide everything. Finally, the woman nodded. "Then we fight." Zuri felt a rush of relief, though she knew it was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the cost would be high. But with this first alliance, they had taken the first step toward a war that would change the galaxy forever. The air was thick with anticipation as Zuri and her team made their way through the underground tunnel system. The walls, damp and jagged, echoed with the sounds of their footsteps, quick, purposeful, but not loud enough to alert anyone above. They had just secured their first real ally, the Zarians, and now they were about to make the first move against the Vorex's control. Zuri's heart beat faster with every step, a mixture of excitement and dread. This was the moment that would set everything in motion, and she knew it couldn't be reversed. The Zarians had promised to help them take down one of the Vorex's key supply depots, a place that stored weapons, ships, and resources that could help turn the tide of the war. This was their chance to strike at the heart of the Vorex's operations. "Are we sure about this?" Kara asked, her voice low but carrying a hint of uncertainty. They had fought together for a long time, but even Kara was feeling the weight of what was about to happen. "If we fail—" "We won't fail," Zuri interrupted, her tone firm. She couldn't afford to show doubt, not now. "We've got the intel. The Zarians know the way. We hit them hard and fast and we get out before they can retaliate. But we're not just going up against some local militia," Jovan added, his usual calm now tinged with concern. "The Vorex have a stronghold here. Their forces are everywhere. If we're discovered—" "They won't discover us," Zuri said, her voice unwavering. "This is just the beginning, Jovan. We'll show them we're not afraid. We've got the element of surprise, and that's enough." They reached the entrance to the supply depot, a nondescript door hidden behind a row of metal crates. The Zarians had prepared the way for them, ensuring that the guards would be elsewhere when they arrived. Zuri checked her weapon one last time and motioned for Kara and Jovan to get into position. "We move in 2 minutes," Zuri ordered. "Remember, this isn't just about the weapons, it's about sending a message. The Vorex will know we're here, and we need them to know that this is only the beginning." The air was electric with the tension of the moment. Zuri's grip tightened around the handle of her blaster, her thoughts racing. The Zarians were counting on them. The future of humanity's struggle against the Vorex was riding on this strike, and if it went wrong, it could mean the end of their movement before it even began. Kara nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. She was ready. Jovan, ever the pragmatist, simply gave a brief nod before checking his equipment one last time. Zuri looked over at them, her gaze meeting theirs. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. "As ready as we'll ever be," Kara replied, a small, determined smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Jovan simply muttered, "Let's get this over with." Zuri's finger hovered over the control panel, and then she punched in the code. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the first layer of the depot. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the rows of crates and weapons. Without a word, they moved in, slipping through the door and into the depot. The sounds of their footsteps were muffled by the hum of the facility's ventilation system. Zuri's senses were heightened, every noise amplified in the stillness. She knew this was the calm before the storm. They reached the central room where the Vorex's most valuable assets were stored. Weapons, equipment, and communication devices, everything they needed to keep their forces strong. Zuri's eyes scanned the room, her mind calculating their next move. "Set the charges," Zuri whispered, her voice low but commanding. "We have 10 minutes before the first wave of reinforcements arrives. Get the intel." Make it count. Kara moved quickly to the far side of the room, setting explosives on the crates while Jovan made his way to the terminal, trying to access the Vorex's data on supply routes. Zuri kept watch, her eyes darting around the room, every sense alert. But then the silence was shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. The Vorex guards were closing in. "They're coming," Kara said, her voice tight with urgency. "We've got maybe 3 minutes left." Zuri felt her pulse quicken. "We don't leave anyone behind," she said, her words sharp. "Once the charges are set, we move out. No hesitation." She turned toward Jovan, who was now frantically typing into the terminal. "Hurry up, Jovan. We need that data." Jovan's fingers flew over the keys as the countdown began in Zuri's mind. The explosion would create chaos, but they couldn't afford to get caught. Not now. "Done," Jovan said, closing the terminal. "Let's go." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. They had what they needed. Now it was time to get out. "Move out," Zuri shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. They had just seconds before the depot went up in flames and the war truly began. The explosion ripped through the night, the sound deafening as the Vorex supply depot erupted in a violent burst of light and fire. Zuri's heart pounded as the shockwave rattled her bones, the heat from the blast singeing the edges of her uniform. The ground beneath her shook as the facility disintegrated into a cloud of smoke and debris. "Move now!" Zuri shouted, grabbing Kara's arm and pulling her toward the escape route they'd planned. Jovan was already ahead, his silhouette barely visible through the smoke. The countdown was done, but the real clock had just begun. They ran through the dimly lit hallways, the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning metal. The base was in chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the muffled sounds of Vorex soldiers scrambling to respond filled the air. Zuri knew that the attack had hit them hard, but they had no time to savor the victory. The Vorex were far from defeated, and the retaliation would be swift. As they reached the back exit, Kara's voice cut through the chaos. "We can't just leave, the others are still inside." Zuri glanced over her shoulder, torn between the mission and the people still trapped inside. But there was no time to hesitate. They had what they needed: the data, the intel on the Vorex's weapons caches, their supply routes. If they stayed any longer, they risked getting caught in the inevitable lockdown. "We can't do anything more now," Zuri shouted back, urgency in her voice. "We have to get out before the Vorex cut off our escape route." They reached the rendezvous point, an old hidden transport vehicle waiting to take them to safety. The engine hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Zuri shoved open the door, ushering Kara and Jovan inside before jumping in herself. "We're clear," Jovan said, his eyes scanning the empty street outside. "For now." Zuri closed her eyes, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The mission was a success, but as they sped away from the burning depot, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had come at a cost. Hours later, back at their temporary base, Zuri stared at the holographic map of the Vorex's supply lines. The data they had secured was more than they could have hoped for: routes, caches, military outposts, but the victory felt empty. The faces of the rebels who hadn't made it out haunted her thoughts, the price of their success weighing heavily on her shoulders. "We hit them hard," Kara said, breaking the silence as she approached the table, her eyes scanning the data. "We've got enough here to cause some real damage." Zuri's gaze lingered on the map. "It's not enough." "What do you mean?" Kara asked, her voice sharp with confusion. Zuri looked up at her, her eyes tired but determined. "We took out one depot, one small piece of the Vorex's operation. But they have so much more. This isn't over, it's just the beginning." The weight of the moment settled over the room. They had started a war, and wars didn't end with just one victory. "We can't keep going like this, Zuri," Jovan interjected, his voice calm but filled with the weight of their actions. "The Vorex will retaliate, and they will come for us, for the people who helped us. They'll strike back harder than we can imagine." Zuri felt the words settle in her chest like stones. She knew he was right. Every action had consequences, and they had just made themselves a target. "We knew the stakes," she said, her voice low. "This is what we signed up for." Kara stepped forward, her face filled with quiet understanding. You're not alone in this, Zuri. We're all in it together. Zuri nodded, the fire in her eyes unyielding. They had started a fight they couldn't back out of, but she was ready. Ready to stand with her people. Ready to face whatever came next. Outside, the night was still. The winds had calmed, but the storm that was about to hit was just beginning. Zuri looked out into the distance, her heart heavy with the knowledge that every step forward would cost them something, but she would not back down. Not now. This war has just begun, Zuri whispered to herself, and we're going to win it.